Good morning and welcome to Monday, Amani 8th grade. I hope everyone is well. We are continuing with our lesson in our poetry unit with figurative language, and today we have imagery. So let's just go over a couple of things before we get into what imagery is. So you should be able to see the slide that is above you. So put down your phones, unless you're watching this on your phones. So today's objective is to identify and explain the purpose of imagery in a poem. What does imagery do for a poem? The second is explain how imagery affects the tone of the poem. So if we're seeing certain images in a poem, if we're making these mental pictures in a poem, okay, what does it do for the actual tone of the poem? How are we supposed to feel? So this is about words into pictures in your brain. So imagery and poetry. The words that the poet uses should kind of give you something to think about, picture into your brain, taking all the other things that you already know, all the knowledge that you know about setting and about characters and about language, and saying, okay, what has the poet done? What am I looking at? What do I see? So we're going to be reading a poem by Gary Soto today, which I think we've read a poem by him before as well. He's kind of featured in this poetry unit. So we're going to be reading a red poem by Gary Soto. And when we're reading, we're going to read with a purpose. Always read with a purpose. So let's take a look. So first of all, as we read everything, we read for gist, just a general understanding. What is this poem about, and where are we brought to by it in terms of setting? In other words, we start reading something, we're understanding where we are. Like, where are we? What do I know about these places? If a poem takes place on a farm, what do I know about a farm? What kind of background knowledge do I have? You can even think back to anything you've read either independently that takes place in a rural area, someplace where there are farms. Think about Lenny and George. You get the feeling, you bring knowledge with you into what you read. So reading for gist, general understanding, and certainly setting is part of it. Where and when does this take place? Secondly, reading for deeper understanding, which always requires a second reading. Listen, people, I read things twice, okay, not because I'm a fool. Well, I'm a fool for many reasons, but I read things twice. Once, I just need to read, what am I reading? What am I absorbing? Okay, and then the second reading is for a deeper understanding. Now, this is more school type of reading. Okay, I don't necessarily read a novel, read every page twice. But I certainly, when I'm studying something, when I need to present something or learn something, I read it twice. Okay, so reading for a deeper understanding in terms of poetry, is there something in this poem? Is there some kind of message in this poem that I'm looking for? The third thing, identifying imagery in the poem, things we can see. Like I said, these writers are making mental images. Okay, they're using language. This is what we're looking for today. Identifying what is a visual, what is this imagery in the poem. We have to be able to identify it before we can talk about it. And then lastly, recognize how the imagery in the poem affects the tone of the poem. So if we're seeing certain things, how does it make us feel? What is the message being presented to us? So a red poem by Gary Soto. Here's basically a summary of the poem. I'm just going to give it to you right even before we read it. It's not going to affect it in any negative way. So a red poem is a poem with a pro-education main idea, though very subtly revealed. You're not going to read this and be like, it's not about books. It's not about sitting in classrooms. Okay, it's not going to be a direct message to you. But when you read and think about the small mentions about education in there, it's subtle, it's on the down low, but you'll see how it is a very pro-education poem. It is about a man who must work extremely hard to provide his family with basic essentials. No, it's not about me. But this is who it's about. It's a story of pride, regret, and hope. Okay. And then a little note to myself here, which is incidentally, these last two really resonate today, both with poetry and with prose. Um, we've seen this word basic essentials. We've seen this word essential kind of take a jump to the forefront lately with what do we consider to be essential, things that we can't live without, things that we need. And we've heard that attached to essential workers. So to me, this is what learning's about. We take something that we read and then we attach it to what's going on in the world today. You're building on your knowledge. What's an essential worker? We've heard this phrase over and over. Okay, those who we can't do without. These jobs we didn't really value or think about much in the past, and yet now they're at the front of every, just about every news story that we talk about, from the people bagging your groceries to the frontline medical workers. It's a story um, of pride, regret, and hope. And in these times, I think we have more time kind of in our own heads and we think about these things, think about the pride of the people who are working, think about the lost pride of the people who have lost their jobs, and certainly hope is on everybody's mind because we hope for some kind of resolution and change as we move forward. This is all part of your learning. We take everything, all our experiences, even as weird and wacky and disruptive as they are, and we try to make something out of it. So I'm going to read the poem in its entirety. And also, I've read this poem many times, so I'm going to try to take the tone of the poem. So you'll pick something up with the reading itself. I'd like you to have the poem in front of you as well. You should certainly be able to get a split screen when you work, um, doing the work for today and on Thursday when you're going to be doing a little extended writing for this. You should always have the poem somehow in front of you to reference and to work with. So, A Red Palm by Gary Soto. You're in this dream of cotton plants. You raise a hoe, swing, and the first weeds fall with a sigh. You take another step, chop, and the sigh comes again, until you yourself are breathing that way, with each step a sigh that will follow you into town. Then, hours later, the sun is a red blister coming up in your palm. Your back is strong, young, not yet the broken chair in an abandoned school of dry spiders. Dust settles on your forehead, dirt smiles under each fingernail. You chop, step, and by the end of the first row, you can buy one splendid fish for wife and three sons. Then another row of fish, another row, another fish. You can rest in the backyard under a tree, your hands twitch on your lap, not unlike the fish on a pier or the bottom of a boat. You drink iced tea, the minutes jerk by like flies. It's dusk, now night, and the lights in your home are on. The rest of the poem is not on screen. I just want to make a note of that. I'm going to be reading. That costs money, yellow light in the kitchen. That's 30 steps, you say to your hands, now shaped into binoculars. You could raise them to your eyes. You were a fool in school, now look at you. You're a giant among cotton plants. Now you see your oldest boy also running. Papa, he says, it's time to come in. You pull him into your lap and ask, what's 40 times 9? He knows as well as you, and you smile. The wind makes peace with the trees. The stars strike themselves in the dark. You get up and walk with the sigh of cotton plants. You go to sleep with a red sun on your palm, the sore light you see when you first stir in bed. Just a note with the reading. I thought we'd get another slide up here with the entire poem, so I had to kind of just improvise. So let's just go. Remember, we read with the purpose of looking at imagery, these pictures in our mind. So we know that, and also just a note about setting. We know this is taking place on a farm of some sort, and we know it's cotton plants because it was mentioned. This is hard work. You bring this knowledge with you, so you understand that this is somebody, and that sun, a red palm. We're talking about what? If you work hard and there's constant rubbing, what's happening, to your skin? So it's described as if this red sun is coming up, okay, but it's really a blister. So that's one kind of imagery. There are a couple of others that are featured in the poem. So dust settles on your forehead, dirt, that line. It's something that we can see. Okay, it's something that we can visualize. Somebody working in the field, getting dirty. The other is the smiles under each fingernail, and I have the image up in front of you. If your fingernails, if you note, you hold them a certain way and the dirt gets under it, it's a smile. You turn it upside down, it's a frown. But it's a wonderful way to represent that dirt under the fingernails in the shape of a smile. That's imagery. It's giving us a picture. He could have just said dirt under fingernails, but he didn't. It's smiles under each fingernail. It's the use of language and imagery to make something so we can see something in our heads. So these are some of the questions that you have on the work that's due tomorrow that you'll get today. And it's multiple choice. With multiple choice, we do what? We don't just look for the right answer. We read all of the possible answers. We eliminate because there's a reason to eliminate. So here's your question. Which of the following is an example of imagery? That's hours later, which is in stanza 2. Dust settles on your forehead, dirt, stanza 3. You can buy one splendid fish for wife, stanza 2, and until you have enough and move on to milk, stanza 2. Again, imagery, something we can picture. That's hours later. We're talking about time. That's not even um, a material thing that we can picture. We could picture a clock, but that's not really what's being described. So I'm going to eliminate A. Dust settles on your forehead, dirt. I can picture that. I can picture somebody working so hard and getting dirty as they go along. So I'm going to skip that right now because it's a possible answer. You can buy one splendid fish for wife. Well, splendid fish brings something into my mind. I can picture a splendid fish, although it's not really vividly described. But again, I'm going to skip that one because that's a possible answer. And then lastly, until you have enough to move on to milk, seems to be a line that's just drawn um, out of nowhere. It's talking about how hard you have to work. So it's definitely between B and C. So tell me, what do you think the answer is? Take a moment. If you pick B, you are absolutely correct. Dust settles on your forehead, dirt. Again, it's an image. It's something that we can picture, something that we can see. Do another one. Which sensory detail is best captured in your example or choice from question number 3? So that was question number 3 we just answered. So if we said that this is something that we can picture, dust settling on your forehead, dirt, if this is the answer that we pick, Sensory detail. Think about it. Senses, things that we can touch, taste, smell, all our senses. Taste, touch, see, smell, hear, and you in particular, 8th grade, annoy. But I left that one out. Too many choices. So we just said that this is dust settling on the forehead. It's something we could taste. No, we're not seeing that in the poem. It's not as if it settled into his mouth, I'd say fine, but we can eliminate that. Something you can touch, all right, that's a possibility. But what's the imagery? We don't get the feel of it. So I don't really see that. Is the dust on the forehead something that we can see? Well, yeah, I'm picturing this in my mind, and we said imagery was picturing. And then smell, no, we're not smelling the dust. And hear, well, if you can hear dust settling anywhere, you must be a light sleeper. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you picked what, you were correct. C. Good. C and C. We can picture this. Again, this is imagery. Things we picture in our mind through language. And let's do one more. By the way, I'm doing this to help you through your work. So if you watch this video, 30% of your work going through it should be done correctly. So which statement best captures why the author uses this example of imagery? This is where we're going into tone. Okay, the author uses this imagery because he wants us to hear this poem or feel this poem in a certain way. So which statement best captures why the author uses? Why does the author use this particular imagery that he does? To depict the protagonist's life of backbreaking work. Throughout the poem, he's working hard, isn't he? He even separates the work into what he can buy. 3 more rows of chopping this cotton and I can buy a fish. More rows and I can buy milk. The electricity is on. I need to walk, 30 more paces and buy. Think about that every hour you spent or everything that you do, you're attaching it to one more thing, one more essential thing that you can get for your family. So backbreaking work, certainly on a farm, that's a possible answer. The poet uses this imagery to convey the protagonist's hope for his son. Okay, we certainly have the son come into the poem, but the imagery that we're talking about, we don't really hear much about what he hopes for his son, but I would say that's a thoughtful answer. And I'm not eliminating the first two. I see possibilities in them. The poet uses, this is C now, the poet uses this imagery to show the protagonist's need for a shower. He's not dirty. He's not giving this just to say that he needs to shower. I can certainly eliminate. And the poet uses this imagery to capture the setting of a cotton farm. I would think that we didn't get a lot of description of the cotton farm in particular. So again, this imagery was not a focus of the poem. It's definitely between A and B. And what do you think it is? Dang, you are on point today. The poet uses this imagery to depict the protagonist's life of backbreaking work. Okay, the images of hard work, the images of the again the necessities. Okay, this is all attached to the red palm, the blister in his palm. This is all to convey how hard he works. And let's just take a look. This also will be on your work, so make that 40% of your work can be done correctly if you're watching this video. So let's reread these lines from the 3rd stanza. The wind makes peace with the trees, the stars strike themselves in the dark. How does this imagery change the tone at the end of the poem? Well, let's think about first of all, the imagery at the beginning of the poem. The beginning of the poem, and most of the poem, is him working extremely hard in order to provide for his family. Okay, this is like a grind. This is what he does. This is what he sacrifices throughout his life. This is what he does for work, to put food on the table, turn the lights on for his family. And the poem kind of ends. It's not the ending lines of the poem, but he's sitting there at the end of the day, tired, okay? And the wind makes peace with the trees, the stars strike themselves in the dark. If we're thinking about that imagery, that's pretty peaceful and calm. It's nature doing what nature does. You know, the wind settling into the trees, the stars essentially turning themselves on at night as they do, as it gets darker. It's a beautiful way to just say the stars have come out, almost like striking a match and creating that flame of light. It's like an acceptance. The tone seems to be much peaceful in a sense, and the word peace is actually in there, but it's calm, it's peaceful, it's the way things should be. Should a man work as hard as he has to? Um, that's a hard thing, you know, to kind of accept, that somebody has to think in terms, work so hard and think in terms of, you know, now I could get this for my family, now I could provide that essential for my family. So the tone changes, and I would argue that the tone, you know, during the poem is uh, one of hardship and of constant striving and trying to get somewhere. And then the tone changes at the end to something that's more peaceful and more accepting. Um, and the world being as the world should be. So nature's rhythms, however you want to describe it. But to me, that's how the tone changes. You don't have to agree with me. Lord knows there are many things you don't agree with me on, and that's okay. But explain yourself. And that concludes today's lesson. Again, I just want to review. We've talked about similes, making comparisons, okay, metaphors, replacing certain objects, hyperbole, which is exaggerations, and now we've gone on to figurative language. I'm sorry, and now we've gone on to imagery. I would say that imagery is hard to recognize, hard to understand, difficult to write, but ever so useful if we can get our writing to that point where we can write and make these pictures in the reader's mind. So read the 3 poems that are assigned. You'll see it in your Google Classroom. I hope you enjoyed these poems. It takes rereading to kind of figure out what's going on and also to absorb it. Um, I know you got some time on your hands, as difficult as it might be. Mr. A loves you and thinking of you, and contact me. You know I will get back to you. All right. Peace, 8th grade.